guys, it's Izzy here, and you guys are looking a bit crooked, so I will fix that in a moment. But I am doing my April wrap-up today, so mind you, there are still 6 days left in the month, and I do plan to finish more books in that time, but I wanted to show you the 15 books that I finished so far. This is my biggest reading month ever. Let's get into it. My tripod is definitely having issues, so if you guys have recommendations for tripods to use for YouTube videos, let me know in the comments because I'm thinking I need an upgrade. But we're going to start with the books that most recently finished, and I finished these 2 books literally in the past 2 hours, so I don't have written reviews yet, so these are just going to be kind of my off-the-cusp thoughts. So the book that I just finished is Love, Pamela by Pamela Anderson. Lots of tabs. So this is a 5-star prediction for me, and it did live up to the 5 stars. I gave it a 5 out of 5 rating, meaning it's one of my new favorite books. This was honestly so relatable. I've always been inspired by Pamela Anderson and just her image. I always thought she was beautiful and intelligent, and then actually getting to read her words, this was so unique, as a lot of this was told in poetry, and I've never read a memoir like that. Also, she is a celebrity and did not use a ghostwriter, and I think that speaks volumes, because I can only think of one other book that I read that didn't use a ghostwriter that's by a celebrity, and that's another one of my favorites, so maybe celebrities don't use ghostwriters. But yeah, honestly, this was just so... In the last chapter, maybe the epilogue, a director said that she was so vulnerable, and that's something you don't see a lot in Hollywood nowadays, and that's what I think this book, I think this is the perfect way to describe her. She's so vulnerable, so real, so intelligent, as I said, authentic, relatable, and she doesn't think she's a victim, and I think that is honestly amazing, because so many, of all the things that she's been through, this goes from her first memory to her most recent, just of everything she's been through, a lot of people would say they're a victim, but she's like, I did crazy stuff, so crazy stuff happened to me. And that's true. That is how the world works. So I did absolutely love this. Highly recommend. The next book is a short story collection that I also finished today. This is a science fiction. So this was a 3.5, 3.75. So I still recommend it. I still enjoyed it. And that is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu. This, as I said, it's science fiction. So this is pandemic fiction. And I don't think I've read a science fiction short story collection. So this was something very new to me. But the genre being pandemic fiction, dystopian, I would say lightly on dystopian, because it still seems like this is so real that this really could happen, because it only takes place in 2030, or it starts out then. And we just saw how all different people's lives were affected by this pandemic, and having lived through a pandemic, I do think that's extremely fascinating, and I wonder if in 100 years people will write books about just different people's experiences in the COVID pandemic, which I'm sure there's probably already books like that out, but I just think looking back would be super interesting. This is looking into the future, so that's also something very unique, and I did enjoy it because, as I said, it felt so real. And because there's a ton of pandemic fiction that I read, but this one I felt was the most authentic one of what a pandemic's actually like, probably because this was written during a pandemic, about a fictional pandemic. Whoa. On Saturday, I finished a romance book, a sequel, and a series, and that is Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert. So this was a 4-star for me. I didn't love it as much as I loved the first book in the series, Good Life, Chloe Brown. This one, I just didn't connect with the characters as much. I don't think Dani had that much depth to her. She did develop a lot through the story, but I feel like Saphir just had so much more to him. There was so much more depth. We really understood him as a person. The setting, this is British, and I think it's just very British. The writing was a bit lengthy, and that it's not even 400 pages, but I still felt like this went on a little too long. But another thing is, a lot of books, it's rare for me to get actual out loud emotions reading a book. This one actually made me laugh out loud, which is extremely rare for a book to do, so shout out to that. This does use the fake dating trope, which I felt like it did a good job with that. That's not my favorite trope because like, do people actually do that other than celebrities? I don't know. Which, Zaf, he's kind of a celebrity. He's a retired athlete, but that's not my favorite trope, so that probably went into me not loving this. And then at times, Zephyr wasn't my favorite person. Like, this guy went up to him saying, it was at a conference for Dani, but he was like, he told Saf, he was like, I'm a big fan of you and all that. And Saf was like, shut the F up. He's like, I'm here for my girlfriend. Like, you could at least be nice to the guy. Like, if somebody went off on me like that, y'all want to hear the end of it. So there's, take a hint, Dani Brown. Now we have my fantasy pick for the month, and this was the first book in a trilogy. I will not be continuing the trilogy. I think I give this a 2-star. Yeah, this was a 2-star. So this is The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah. So this is a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy, which is not something new to me. I have read even this year, other Middle Eastern inspired fantasies. So yeah, that's pretty interesting that both fantasies I've read recently have been like the same setting. I think the characters in this were not that developed as Luli, who is the main character, but we do have multiple perspectives. The brothers, I honestly was just getting them confused. I was like, which one did this, which one did that? And I'm still honestly confused. And then the other female character, I think her name was Aisha. I could be blanking on the name because, again, they weren't that well developed. I just felt like she was random to the story. I was like, okay, she knows one of the brothers and is working for him and is a thief, but like, what's the point of her? As we talked about this being a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy, I did really like that setting, and it has even inspired me to look for books that have Middle Eastern settings, maybe that are historical or contemporary literary fiction, just because I want to know more about that part of the world. As being an American in the past 25 years, there's a lot of bias to that, so I would like to read more Middle Eastern authors, this author being from Kuwait. So the writing was fine, the plot was fine, but this book really didn't do anything for me. But if you're interested, I would say still pick it up. It just wasn't for me. Now we have A Year in the South, 1865, the true story of 4 ordinary people who lived through the most tumultuous 12 months in American history by Stephen V. Ash. This is a nonfiction book, and to be honest, I was hesitant before going into it, as this book was published in 2002, and it takes place in the Confederacy. So I was like, what's it going to give me? Is it going to be biased, as we were just talking about? Is it going to be glamorized? And no, I think this author did a fantastic job. So for the people, we have a man who is a former slave, and then we have a woman who is a widow living in poverty with her children, and then we have a man who was a soldier and is just trying to get his life back together again, and then a man who is trying to find solace in religion. And I think those are all very different people, and it talked about how harsh this time was with slavery and racism, sexism, and I think that's so important. If you're going to talk about such a tumultuous time in history, you have to address the bad things that happened and not glamorize it or whatever. And this book did not do that in the slightest. It even talked about how in the late 1800s to the early 1900s, this time period was getting glamorized while these people were still alive. Former slaves were still alive. And I just can't imagine how they would have felt seeing movies like Gone with the Wind and just seeing there was like reenactments of this kind of thing. And people just really do glamorize that time period, especially back then. I do think it is getting better now, but we're not here to talk about the now. But I've always been curious about what happens to civilians, what happens to normal people, not famous people, during these big events in history. What is life like for the normal person? And this book answered those questions. I gave it a 3-star. I did enjoy it. And if you are interested in this time and location, I do recommend picking it up. As I told y'all, it is not biased, and that was very important for me because in America, this still is quite a touchy subject for some people. So I was scared that this book might be, but it didn't. It really showed for all kinds of people what life was. Now we have a 1-star. So I haven't given a 1-star this year, I don't think. but that is because this month I decided how I'm going to do it. So my 5 stars are books that are absolute favorites. 4 I loved, but they're not a new favorite. 3 I enjoyed, it was a good book. 2 it did nothing for me. So that's why with 2 and 1 I'm kind of like, should I switch them? So 2 did nothing for me. I didn't hate it, I didn't love it, it was just there. And then 1 star is a book that I didn't like. So sometimes you come across those, and that's Breathless by Amy McCulloch for me. So this is a thriller, and I didn't like the main character. Don't even remember her name, Cecily. She just thought the world was an awful place, and thought everyone was awful, and was just constantly complaining like, yeah, you're going through a bad time, but I don't really want to hear it. Atmosphere, as this is in Nepal, I think that's Nepal, where Kathmandu is, and all of that, the Himalayas, and that's a very fascinating setting, and being on a mountain, being about mountain climbers, very unique. And the author has actually gone on this trek before, and so I think that really shows off, as this was a very well researched book. The writing, fine. The plot, again, extremely interesting plot. But, oh yeah, the writing did get repetitive at times. You can definitely tell this is the author's first adult book. She's written YA, or YA middle grade, I'm not exactly sure. But you can tell it's her first adult book. So hopefully she does evolve as a writer. Now we have my graphic novel pick, and that is Check Please, Book 2, Sticks and Scones by Ngozi Uzuku. So I'm not going to tell y'all about the plot because I don't want to spoil, but this was very wholesome. But my one complaint is there's just so many words on a page. Like, I don't know if this is a good example, but there's just so many words, and I'm like, what do I look at, the words or the pictures? So it was just kind of frustrating for me on that front, but it was still good. I don't give star ratings to graphic novels. Now we have a mood read that was also a gift, and that is Checkout 19 by Claire Louise Bennett. This book was so strange. So strange. I don't know if I'm going to unhaul it or not. And the writing is the only thing you really need to know about this book. I feel like it's the only important thing here. That sounds kind of bad. I don't know. I'm not trying to be rude. But to be honest, this book is a perfect example of how my mind works. All over the place. Thinking about books and coming up with my own stories. That's how my mind works. And I feel like that's what this book was pretty much about. Like, I honestly don't know what I read in this book. It was chaotic and random, but honestly there were so many beautiful lines in this book. It would be a fun one to annotate. So that being said, I do think I'm going to keep it, and maybe on reread I'll have a better understanding of it. This was a confusing time, a reading experience, but some parts of this book were just spot on, and there were beautiful quotes. So I gave it a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Now we have my ebook from last month, but it was over 1,000 pages, so it did take me a little while to get through, and that is World Without End by Ken Follett. So again, I didn't really connect with the characters as much as the first book in the series, but I think Karis might be my new favorite Ken Follett character. She's just so passionate and dedicated about what she does, and I appreciate that so much. So this is in Middle Ages England. Love the Middle Ages. That's like my coming home setting. And then the writing, his writing is very descriptive and lengthy. Just, y'all need to know that. So plot-wise, I love that Ken Follett goes to different centuries throughout history and humanizes people, humanizes history, showing that these were real people in these events that were happening in history. We had wars, we had plagues, we had witch trials, just so much stuff. Those were real people in those events, and he just does a great job at portraying humans throughout history, and that is my favorite thing about Ken Follett. And I gave this, oh no, what did I give this? A 3 or 4. I think I give it a 4 out of 5. So I started a buddy read book club kind of thing in the month where I am going to be reading Taylor Jenkins Reid books with whatever my friends wants to pick them up, and we're going to be reading them in chronological publication order. So the first book Taylor Jenkins Reid's ever published was Forever Interrupted. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Taylor Jenkins Reid knows how to develop characters, making them more than just a name on the page, making them real people. The chemistry here between Ben and Elsie was fantastic. It felt so real. I was scared that their relationship here wouldn't feel as developed or feel as real because it was just so fast and it was so short-lived that I was scared that it just wouldn't be developed enough, but I should have known that it would be with Taylor Jenkins Reid writing the book. The author does a great job with Los Angeles settings, but I mean, it makes sense as she does live there, and I'm pretty sure she's from there, but not 100% on that. The writing was where this gets a little bit rocky. The timeline jumping did get a little confusing, and I would have to remind myself which timeline, which story we were in. And then some phrases did get repetitive as the story went on, which kind of made me roll my eyes. And then the book just felt like it went on too long. By the last quarter, I was just waiting for it to end, to be honest with y'all. As this was Taylor Jenkins Reid's debut novel, I can definitely say her writing skills have improved over the years. The romance presented here was mesmerizing, as it just shows how love can come into your life when you're not looking for it, and how true love can really change somebody's life. I can only hope for a love like Ben and Elsie, but hopefully it has a better ending. So this was a 4 out of 5 stars. I loved it, but it's not a new favorite. We have another historical nonfiction now, and that is Astoria by Peter Starks. This is Astor and Jefferson's Lost Pacific Empire, a tale of ambition and survival on the early American frontier. I did do the audiobook for this, and also for the Pamela Anderson book I did the audiobook for. If John Jacob Astor had not been so passionate about his fur trading emporium, I do not think the United States West Coast, probably including Canada and Mexico as well, I do not think the West Coast would look the same as it does today. I love these stories of expansion and survival in the wilderness. It just really shows the limits that a person can be pushed to in nature, not just physically, but also mentally as well. This shows what was happening in the times between the Lewis and Clark expedition and then the Oregon Trail, which is a time period that I never really thought about, but now that I think about it, like when I was reading this, I was like, whoa, I never thought of this. So I'm glad that I learned about a new part of American history that I didn't know about before. So this was a 4 out of 5. I highly recommend it. Now we have a fun one that I thought was going to be my favorite of the month, but then I read so many good books. And that is My Year of Rest and Relaxation by Otessa Moshfegh, a very popular book on BookTube and probably IRL. I don't know though. We learned so much about this character without even knowing her name. It's so strange getting to so close and knowing all this personal info about a person without knowing the most basic thing about them, which is their name. Perhaps a name is just a label after all. This book would not be possible without its setting. So it takes place in New York City, which I feel like is a great setting, as this is somebody who's like going in hibernation really. And in New York, you can be in an apartment building, when in like suburban America, like where I live, you have to get out of your neighborhood to go to the store. Like you have to really get out into the world. When in New York, you can really just go down the block and go to the bodega, whatever. And then this takes place in 2000 and 2001. And I feel like now you couldn't really do this without the influence of the outside world, because now social media and the internet is so prevalent, when back then it wasn't really a thing. The internet was still relatively new and nowhere near what it is today. So I feel like this was just the perfect setting for this kind of book. The writing was so gripping and intriguing, which I feel like is so important for a book like this, where the character is literally hibernating. And then this plot about a woman who is so depressed and wants to restart her life by going into hibernation. So fascinating, so unique. Who thinks of writing something like that? And then it might sound kind of boring, but just I love going into the human mind, seeing how the mind works, seeing how different people live their lives, and you get that perfectly here. I love this book, but I still have a lot of questions that I didn't get answered, so that's why I have to give this a 4-star rather than a 5, but it's probably more like a 4.5 because I did really love this book and thought it might be a favorite. Now we have Beast by Irene Sola. This is a poetry collection, and the name is perfect for it. It was so animalistic, so clever, and I just love Irene Sola's writing, and I want her to publish more books, especially translated into English. This one was actually cool, as it was in Catalan and in English as well. We have another mood reading pick, and that is Post Traumatic by Chantel V. Johnson. Absolutely love this cover. It's beautiful, but the inside didn't really match those thoughts. So in Sad Girl Lit, the characters are usually not meant to be likable. So here I just didn't care about the character that much at all, but she was relatable. Oops, I'm sorry. The setting didn't play a huge part. It is a New York City sign again, but I don't think that played a massive part in the story. The writing was average and what I expect for a debut novel. The plot sounded intriguing, but on page, I didn't really care for it. So again, another book that I didn't care for. That means it was a 2-star. And lastly, we have Celtic Tales, Fairy Tales and Stories of Enchantment from Ireland, Scotland, Brittany, and Wales. Illustrations by Kate Forrester. So I read this like it was a carryover from March for St. Patrick's Day. It matches that holiday perfectly. So this was, as it said, a fairy tale collection. And it's just so interesting how some stories are similar throughout different cultures. And it just really makes you think, how did all these stories come to be? Was there once a civilization that went all around the world? Aliens? Who knows? But I did really enjoy this, and the illustrations were beautiful, and I would recommend if you are interested in Celtic Tales. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you made it all the way through, leave a clover emoji in the comments below. And as always, comment, rate, and subscribe, and I can't wait to see you in the next video. And don't forget to ring that notification bell to be notified when all my videos go live. Bye!